So, of course, all uses of violence and war are in general not ideal, but in this case, it's very clear who the aggressor is. Some wars have long histories, for instance, in Israel, Palestine, or in Africa. There's a lot of wars going on that have enormous histories that we might not understand from the West, but however, because we know so much about Europe here in the UK, I think it's very clear to us that Russia in this case is the invader, and Ukraine is trying to defend itself against the Russian invaders, but it's hard because it's a much smaller country. It has less reserves. It's economically it's less strong. That the circumstances are good enough for them to go into peace talks and get a good deal out of that. So a lot of civilian lives have been lost in this war in Ukraine. We know that the theater in Mariupol has been bombed. We know that more than 100 of hospitals have been bombed. In Bucha, they found a lot of civilian casualties after the Russians invaded, and now a train station with more than 1,000 of civilians, refugees even, was also bombed. So I think at this point it's clear to say that it's not a mistake. You know, sometimes bombs fall on the wrong places and another way that the international community can intervene is via NATO. NATO members are sending weapons and they're sending material to for the Ukrainians to defend themselves. But if they would intervene in this war with their own troops, that would mean that Russia would also be in war with NATO, and that would cause far greater trouble and would also be very dangerous to the NATO countries. So they are deciding to not do that unless maybe biological weapons are used, or nuclear weapons in the worst case scenario. So what is left is that the international community, or at least a lot of Western countries, are imposing sanctions on Russia. Money from oligarchs and possessions like big ships are being confiscated, or at least they cannot use them anymore. But it's difficult because not every country in the world is against Russia in this case. A lot of members of the UN have abstained from voting, such as China, and India is actually agreeing to buy oil from Russia. So, you know, giving even more money to Russia for them to spend on the war. So it's difficult to do something as an international community, and therefore Ukraine cannot count on the help of other countries. But then if the international community cannot do that much, except for supplying material to Ukraine, the question remains, what can we do personally? And there's a lot of initiatives. So if the international community cannot do as much except for supply material, the question remains what we can do personally. For instance, you could help Ukrainian refugees. There's a lot of refugee places where they need hands-on help, like language lessons, or just in general, people need to speak to someone because they've been in a war. But other than that, they also need supplies like clothes and medicines. So anything you can send that you don't need, you can send it to Ukraine. So at the beginning of this conflict, a lot of people wondered if this was going to be the start of World War III. Now, after more than a month of conflict, I think we can safely say that right now there's no reason to think that. The conflict is pretty contained within Ukraine, and unless NATO decides to get involved in the war, there is no need to be afraid of World War III.